So I must have spent quite a bit over £20,000 on pedals over the years. I've got a spreadsheet, and I encourage you maybe not to do this, but of gear that I've kind of sold. Basically, I think in the house that I had before this one, my wife was getting to a stage, I think we weren't married at that point, but it was like, it was stressing her out that I was kind of bringing gear into the house, and it was kind of taking up new rooms. And she also runs a business from home, so it was like a bit stressful. Anyway, that's enough about my wife. You mind your business. And I kept this spreadsheet, and this is years ago, really, that this kind of, and I stopped doing the spreadsheet. But it got to £15,000 on the spreadsheet on pedals alone, and I think it's easily going to be more than that because of all of the pedals that I had before the spreadsheet and all of the pedals that I've since done after that. So easily £20,000 on pedals. And I can honestly say, what have I learned about pedals is that it's quite addictive, right? But I had an email from a Patreon chap, Martin. I do have a Patreon, by the way, if you're interested in getting like backing tracks and tabs for lessons and bits and pieces like that. I don't really kind of do the hard sell on it too much, but in case you do want something to spend your money on monthly, that's the thing. Anyway, so Martin asks, starting a pedal collection, or do you even need one, is his idea for a video. I've just bought my first tube amp, the Vox AC15C1, nice little amp, and I'm really enjoying it. Having started playing guitar using plugins, it's interesting to actually play the original real technology. I'm pretty sure I don't need a pedal board at all, but it's obviously tempting to start down that road. Conventional wisdom seems to be to get pedals for overdrive, but can't I just do that in the amp and turn down my guitar volume for cleans, ? Delay, modulation, amp has tremolo, reverb, amp has that. If I did want pedals, e.g. if I wanted distortion, delays, etc., could I just get a modeler like the 8X Effects, or do physical pedals really offer something different, especially if they're already digital? I'm sure my time would be better spent learning to play the guitar itself, but the gear side is fun too. Okay, so let's address some of these things. This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses. Now, I had to kind of think about this a little bit. So, as I say, you know, there's loads of pedals that I've bought and sold over the years. Lots of little bits and pieces. Some of it, you know, more on the boutique side. Well, that's a save, Tony, all right? Things like the Van Wielden Royal Overdrive. And the thing is that I think, for me, the pedals thing started off as I was like wanting things to go with a real amp. Now, I quite quickly and early on into my guitar career was in multi-channel amp mode, and then kind of 4-cable method with modelers kind of mode. So I think I'm like quite a lot of guitarists maybe who grew up in the 90s or noughties who actually the pedals thing is kind of optional, like Martin's saying. So an amp in 2024 and pedals in 2024 are definitely optional, but I think it's kind of one of those things where unless you've tried the pedals, then it definitely does feel like there's this huge side of stuff that you're missing out on. And you look at like that pedal show and like a show like that, which is super rich in kind of resources and information and, you know, huge amounts of knowledge that those two guys have, as well as walls that are covered with, you know, thousands and thousands of pounds of pedals. I think it is definitely a thing where I feel like the life of a guitarist who doesn't have any interest in like pedals at all might not be as interesting, but at the same time you've got someone like Walter Trout who with a Mesa Boogie Mark IV, you know, has a flourishing, fulfilling career presumably. So pedals definitely optional, but I think if you're asking the question then you're probably already thinking, well, I'm interested in pedals. What I would say as someone who has spent, as I say, like over £20,000 on pedals, go into it with the knowledge that actually some of the pedals at the cheaper end might be just as valid for you as any of the expensive stuff. The boutique stuff is an option, but as I kind of did on a video the other day, you know, the Boss pedals do end up on loads of pros boards. So for me personally, be starting at that end of the market really and thinking about stuff like that. So if you've got a Vox AC15, as I would suggest, I don't think the digital modeling route is necessarily going to yield hugely great results for a few reasons. I think drives in particular are one area where people put an HX Stomp in front of a real amp and then think, yeah, is that really what that is supposed to sound like? And I've done sort of tests with this, but to allow yourself to accept it, you probably need the real pedal to A-B with it. And I don't think that the digital modeling thing really does scratch quite the same itch. But as we've been saying all along, definitely an option. And if you're already using plugins, you could make a whole career not ever using pedals or an amp. So we are definitely talking about optional stuff here, but since you're asking, I'm pretty sure that you're going to be thinking that I want something. So I think my first kind of 3 pedals maybe that I might suggest, I'm going to presume that you're going to be more interested in drive stuff. That's for me where I'm interested personally. I've done a video on this. I've got even less modulation pedals since I made that video. I literally have just the Boss Dimension now. I sold the Walrus Audio Monumental. So I don't, someone, if you were getting into modulation stuff, you probably best watch someone else, because I don't really have any experience in it or any knowledge. I quite like the fractal modulations and the Line 6 modulations. So for me, like a multi-effect for that side of things makes perfect sense. As well for delay stuff, a lot of delays these days tend to be kind of digital anyway. So unless you're really looking for an analog delay, then for me as well, the delay stuff is kind of handled quite nicely in the digital modeling realm as well. The drive side of stuff is actually, I think, where you can get some real stuff out of, and in fact my real pedal board is made up mostly of different drive pedals. So I guess 3 suggestions for maybe a starting point. Bluesdriver, I think it's a pedal that a lot of people should try for a few reasons. It's cheap, really does sound pretty good for a lot of people. You know, in blindfolded shootouts and stuff like that, it can end up sounding good. So I think this one, you probably pick them up for 50, 60 quid. See if it works for you. But the Boss Bluesdriver, 100%, knowing what I know now, having played, you know, thousands and thousands of pounds of other pedals, the Bluesdriver would be one. Another pedal that I really think is worth a play as like a kind of boost, but a really kind of smooth, just a chewy, amazing kind of drive pedal, the Marshall Bluesbreaker. Now there are lots of different versions of the Marshall Bluesbreaker. They did reissue them. I think these actually sound really good. I don't know exactly how it's going to sound into a Vox AC15 or a Bluesdriver, but I imagine it could sound pretty good. So that would be one other thing that I would try. This kind of does the continuum sound really nicely into a Fender. I think a bit underrated. King of Tone and the JHS Morning Glory basically took the circuitry of this and did some things with it. And one other pedal that I would suggest trying would be the Tube Screamer. Now, for me personally, I really like the Tube Screamer for lead tones, is what I've found out. And I did that video the other day, kind of just stacking 3 variants of Tube Screamer together. As it happens, Carter, the Sex Drive on his pedal, kind of a rare pedal, actually not really a Tube Screamer. I did read online that his kind of starting point was maybe a Tube Screamer, but the end result is something like a clean boost without a mid hump. And I guess as you get into pedals, you will learn about some of this stuff, hopefully. But yes, anyway, Tube Screamer, really kind of lead tones is where I suggest that the Tube Screamer does a really good job. Or if you're into heavier sort of stuff, which I'm not necessarily sure you would be, given that your first amp has been a Vox AC15, but the Metal Screamer. So, like you say, the reverb on a Vox AC15 is quite pleasant. The tremolo is also, I think you're handled really for reverbs. You're handled for trem quite nicely with that amp. But those would be my choices for 3 drive pedals. Hopefully some folks will be in the comments giving you some other suggestions for things that they might try. But those are kind of 3 flavors of drive that are subtly different, and maybe not so subtly different in other ways, where they're at least kind of on different ends of the spectrum. I think you'll find with the Vox AC15, if you have it turned up and then back off the volume for cleans, that's a way of doing stuff. But some drive pedals, I think, probably would complement your setup quite nicely. That's kind of my honest opinion on it. I wouldn't necessarily start off down the boutique route. I think there's quite a nice idea to kind of having the staple things that have been on pros boards for decades and decades, and starting off with there, like a ST1 is quite another good shout if you didn't want a Tube Screamer but something in that vein. I personally am an Overdrive kind of guy. There are distortion pedals. I typically don't really find those as pleasant for the kind of music that I'm into necessarily. I kind of prefer the sound of stacking Overdrive. So with 3 drive pedals just like this, you can probably get a wealth of great tones, and especially if you pair them with a volume pedal. I did another video on volume pedal. Stacking just these 3 drives, I think you get amazing results into a Vox AC15, hopefully. Other folks will jump into the comments, hopefully, and let you know. But yeah, I've spent about 20 grand on effects pedals. I wouldn't even really say I have a favourite effects pedal anymore. They kind of are this optional thing for me where it's like, well, there are some things that I like. Maybe the Marshall Bluesbreaker is one of my preferred drives for just, you know, that edge of breakup type stuff. Bluesdriver as well does those edgy kind of glassy tones really well. And the Tube Screamer for more of that kind of sax-like tone in some regards. Those are my thoughts anyway. Please, other folks, jump in and help Martin out in the comments. I'll catch you in another video soon. Cheers.